Hi, this is Jim, and I wanted to make this video to share my experiences, some things I've learned in my short gyro piloting career. I felt like I needed to make this to share what I learned in regards to what they call PIO, or pilot-induced oscillation, is what that stands for. From my experience, it's not PIO at all. It's TIO, trim-induced oscillation. I flew my little air command one day and seemingly flew fine. The next day, I took it up for another fly and I started experiencing porpoising, the oscillation that is what they call pilot-induced. Well, my arm was fatigued, I guess, from the previous day of forcing the little bird to fly level physically. On day two, my arm was fatigued, and so when I would start to relax, my little bird would start to decline. So I'd pull back on the stick and relax, and it'd start down again. And so we were headed into that oscillation that can end deadly if it gets out of control. So I put it on the ground, tightened my trim spring, which was holding the rotors in an attitude that wanted to climb or ascend. And I got in and I took off, flew perfect, flew like it wanted to fly, like it should fly. And in my experience, if they're trimmed out right, you can't even make them porpoise. Because if it's wanting to climb and you push the stick down and relax, it pops back up. So it doesn't get into that porpoising. You can push the stick down, relax, up it comes again. No porpoising, not even intentionally. So that told me right there, and all of the pilots that have died from porpoising, I would venture a guess they had backed their trim spring off in flight and got into a dangerous situation so quickly that they didn't have time to recover. So that's the main reason for this video, is to shed some light on what they call pilot-induced oscillation when it's not pilot-induced at all. He's just trying to save his butt because his trim spring is not set properly and his machine wants to decline. So he gets in a fight with it and sometimes he loses. The other thing I wanted to cover was be aware and careful with all gyrocopters that are of the really short configuration. Not with a long tail, but a real short rudder up against the prop like a Dominator, because I learned this the hard way. I was at a fly-in and I took off to go home after the barbecue, and I made a circle and I got up over the crowd, and I had this little thought of showing off all these fixed wingers. Watch what you can do in a gyrocopter. So I pull the stick back, pull the power back, and I come to a stop, which is okay. I was at 500 feet or close to 500 when I did this. You only need about 300 feet. So I pull back to a stop, and it seemed like it was immediate. I was in a spin. The machine started spinning so quickly, And I was in a Dominator, so I've got a little nose cone, I've got a windshield, and so here I am. This thing is spinning like a top, and of course I'm dropping the whole time. And I've got a crowd of people on the ground below me. Horribly dangerous situation. The first thing I did was call out on my co-pilot. His name is Jesus. And immediately I looked down and I seen my right foot was holding full right rudder. Okay. Not wanting to panic, I started pushing left rudder. I should have slammed left rudder and gave it some gas, but I did it calmly. And pretty quick, it started slowing down the spin. As soon as I could, I gave power, pushed my stick down, because the only way to recover is airspeed. So I pushed my stick down, gave it power. I'm gaining speed, but I was just too low. I had to pull back or I'd fly right into the ground. So I pulled back, I hit, bounced, flew over a little ways and bounced again and broke my wheel off. And the third time I touched down, my right strut stuck in the grass. Over I went. Put my arm down just to keep from hitting the ground. Set of $2,000 rotor blades, looked like an umbrella. The good thing is I wasn't hurt. Got out, righted my ship, and a hard lesson learned right there. I had no previous knowledge that they were capable of spinning like that. So I called Ernie Boyette, the man in Florida that designs and builds Dominators. And I said, Ernie, I just spun my Dominator into the ground. And he started laughing. He says, it sounds like you got the perfect balanced spin. And it's like, oh, gee, great. I got the perfect spin without even trying. There's men try it on purpose, to get them to spin like that. But my lesson came the hard way. I was able to fly away from the crowd. Nobody got hurt. Crashed my machine, walked away from it. And so that's my word of warning to let other gyro and young pilots be aware that a short gyro is capable of going into a spin. I mean, a spin like a top, just whew, 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 whew. So be aware of that. Be aware, another point, be aware of black power lines that don't show up when you're flying up here looking down at the ground and all of the buildings and everything. Black power lines don't stand out. I learned that the hard way. I had an air command and a Dominator. I was flying my little air command around my friend's pasture, doing circles around the pasture. I got the bright idea to do a low pass right over my buddy standing there on the ground watching. And so I go down and I make this arcing turn over my buddy. And as I come out of that turn, I look up and I'm staring at two wires right in front of me. I don't know, 20 yards, 30 yards. I'm doing 50 miles an hour. And against the skyline, yeah, it was obvious there's wires. But previous to that, I was higher and I never saw the power lines. So first thought, up or down, down. So I pushed my stick down. I didn't have the presence of mind because I was in a panic situation. If I would have just powered back, I would have cleared the wires. But I didn't take, that thought didn't enter my mind. I only had a split second before I was going to either hit the wires or miss them. So all I did was put my stick down and wait to see if I cleared them or not. The next thing I know, the ground is coming up at me. I had caught the bottom wire about 10 inches from the end of my rotor. If I'd dropped another 6 inches, I think I would have cleared them with the angle of the rotor blades. Just 10 or 12 inches back in here, if my machine had dropped just 6 inches a foot, I would have cleared the wires. I didn't clear them. So the wire slid back to my hub, robbed me of airspeed, and so I just dropped, hit the ground, do a full somersault, machines on top of me, pinning my head into the pasture. I got 300 pounds of gyro holding me pinned into the pasture. So my friend's daughter, who was in the garage, she heard the crash, come running out, jumped the fence and come over, and my seatbelt was all tucked up in my snowmobile suit because flying an open gyro or air command is like riding a bicycle 50 miles an hour in the sky. And so I wore a snowmobile suit, and the seatbelt was in the folds of my suit, and I couldn't find it. So she reaches in, unbuckles me, and lets me out. Get out, turn the machine upright, another set of rotor blades gone. And so that was a lesson learned the hard way. Be very aware of when you're flying that low, you have to be very aware of what there is to fly into. Both crashes, I never got hurt. This one here, my neck muscles were sore for a week or so just because I'd stretched them, having my head pinned in the pasture. But I was really blessed, both cases. I walk away uninjured. So that's a word of warning that I wanted to point out. Another thing I would like to address is centerline thrust. Back several years when I was flying, I haven't flown now for a few years, but centerline thrust became like a fad, and guys were buying kits and converting their little air commands and other gyros to centerline thrust. Well, between my air command and my dominator, which the dominator is centerline thrust, I preferred flying my air command. The dominator was okay as long as I had a full load of fuel. But as soon as I burned off a few gallons of fuel, I had 2 tanks. I had my seat tank and an extra tank under the seat. As soon as I burned off a substantial amount of fuel, then my gyro wanted to rear back on me. Not a good feeling when you're flying to have your machines feel like it's going to rear over backwards on you. So I don't like centerline thrust. I guess they're okay as long as you keep enough fuel in them that they don't want to buck over backwards on you. But you don't need centerline thrust. My little air command flew beautiful. All these gyros that are not centerline thrust fly beautifully. There's no reason to go buy a kit and convert your machine to centerline thrust. If I had one with a kit on it, I'd take the kit off and put it back in its original fashion because they fly beautifully that way. It's not necessary, and for 2, it'll start rearing back on you when the fuel's low. So that's what I got to say about centerline thrust. One last bit of advice. If you're wanting to train with somebody, which you should, you need to go somewhere and get in beside or in front or behind a pilot that has his controls. First time I flew was in Jim Vanek's front to rear gyro. A pilot let me take control, and we went out and flew around. And that was good. Um, then I went and trained 4 days, and so what I want to tell you about that, unless you have about a month to spare and one or two suitcases full of money, go train somewhere else besides Arkansas. That's where I got some hands-on experience, but very little teaching. I didn't realize how little teaching I received in those 4 days until I got home, bought my air command, and started flying on my own. Then I realized he didn't teach me anything. The longer it took me to learn meant more money in his pocket. That's what I come to realize. He even put a glitch in my landing. Why would you tell somebody to pull back on the stick right when you're getting ready to touch down and cause the machine to flare up? Why would you do that unless it was intentional to mess up their landing? That's the only sense it makes to me. Because there was times he had to grab the throttle, slam it ahead, and grab the stick because I did that little flare up like I was told to do. I mean, he's the teacher, I'm the student. When you're getting ready to touch down, just give it this little pull back and give it that little flare. Why in the world? I just think it was to keep me training longer, you know. Oh, you don't have your landings down. We got to go another week. I don't know. So, anyways, yeah, I would go somewhere else besides Arkansas to get some training. I did get 4 days of hands-on experience where all I ever heard was your nose is a little high or your nose is a little low. Well, that wasn't my fault. That was the trim. If the nose is riding a little high, it's because the trim's a little high. If it's riding a little low, then I think the trim probably needed to be adjusted. You know, I'm just holding the stick and flying level. Anyways, the more I thought about it and the more experience I got, it's like, don't go to Arkansas to get your experience. Go somewhere else. Well, I think I covered all of the issues that I wanted to. The oscillation is trim induced. And if you're flying a short machine, don't put it in a spin. Be aware that they will spin on you, and that's a scary experience. Trust me. So, anyways, I hope this helps somebody that's flying or wanting to fly. Uh, it's just some pointers that I learned in my experience with my two gyros. I've flown four. The one Jim Vanek's, the one I trained in Arkansas, and then I own two myself, the Dominator and Air Command. So my experience is real limited, but I think I learned quite a bit in the short time I was flying. After crashing both of them, I decided not to put my wife through any more anxiety of me coming home without my birds twice. I didn't want to have to do that again with her. So had my fun. I still think gyros are one of the safest forms of flight there is. I still feel that way. The two crashes, the one was my fault, the other one I share a little blame in, the one that spun me in the ground. If it wasn't for that configuration, if I was just flying my air command, I never would have spun that one in the ground. But anyways, even after two crashes, I would not be afraid to climb in another gyro this minute or tomorrow and take off and fly again. I had fun doing it. They're safe, they won't stall. You just be careful never to unload the blades to where you can get in a bunting or a power pushover to where you pull back on the stick, you climb the hill, and then push the stick forward. You can get away with that if you got no power on. But if you got power on, you push that stick ahead, that motor, that rear prop will push you into a forward somersault, which is non-recoverable, and you will die. So that's one of the biggest things to remember is always keep weight on your rotors. It's like swinging a bucket of water around. You got enough speed, you can swing that bucket all the way upside down and the water won't come out. Well, in a gyro, you got to keep weight on the rotor blades at all times, and then keep your airspeed up. That's another thing. You've always got to have the airspeed. Now you can turn downwind if you keep your airspeed in a casual slow turn, because you're not worried about ground speed, you're only worried about airspeed. So if you're in a 50-mile-an-hour headwind, you might have 0 ground speed. You might be just sitting over the ground, but you still got 50 miles an hour airspeed, and that's what you need to fly. So never take off and do a quick downwind turn, because that's killed pilots. They're only 50 feet, 75 feet off the ground, and they turn too sharply downwind, and they don't have altitude to regain the airspeed to stay in the sky. So that's another point that you have to always be aware of, is maintain airspeed at all times or you will come down. Thought of one other point, it slipped my mind. Anyways, I hope that helps somebody. So I guess I'm going to finish this video right now. See you next time with whatever I got to talk about.